Hello, everyone. We're going to get started for our last session of the day, so settle in if you are ready. As a reminder, we're doing Q&A through the app, so if you don't already have it, you can download US Clean Power and navigate to the session. There'll be a Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, and we'll have 10 minutes for questions at the end of the session. So introducing Mike Casey, Robin Pressman, and Tyler DeVillius for their presentation called Developer or Asset Owner, How to Avoid the High Costs of Ghosting Host Communities. Turn it over to you guys.
Good. Hear me okay? Great. So just a quick background. My name is Mike Casey, and I founded and I'm the president of one of the leading marketing, communications, and public affairs firms servicing clean economy companies here in the U.S. So our job is to help you sell more stuff and to get treated fairly by communities. So I'll start with a story. 12 years ago, I was taking my then 6-year-old daughter to a wedding in Idaho Falls. And as this small puddle jumper plane banked in for the descent, you break over a range of mountains on which there were working wind turbines. And half the plane was locals, people who lived there and were returning. And as the wind farm came into view, there was this audible, wow, look at that. And they were really fired up about this project that was running in their communities, and it stuck with me for over 10 years. And the numbers that you're going to see here, you're the first to see these polling numbers, and they connect with that experience for me in 4 ways. First, it was a reminder, the numbers we got back are a reminder that what you do in communities has inherent appeal potential. And the second is I've had this nagging sense as I've served many of the companies here over the last 10 years that appeal is not often being fully leveraged. The third is that under leveraging that appeal is now coming at a very significant pair of costs. And the third is there are some basic things we can do about that will really advance fortunes on a number of fronts. Okay, so let me set some landscape context points before we give you the numbers. Can I just see a show of hands? How many people in here are developers and you work in community engagement and you have found that in the last several years community engagement has gotten cheaper, easier, and faster? Yeah, that's the reaction I thought, because we, in our work for you, we hear exactly the opposite. We're in a situation now where wind and solar development, you can have power plants that are worth $100, $200, $300 million, and the plans for them can be killed because 50 people organized on Facebook and showed up in the room and screamed at the swing vote on the county commissioner, and down it goes. So obviously there's an enormous financial risk, but there's also a long-term financial risk that comes from the policy impact, because every single time we're in a big fight over a project, there is a dust cloud. Whether you win or lose, the dust cloud blows back to state houses and governor's mansions, right? So there's a twofold risk here, and this is not accidental. There's one person in this room who was there 12 years ago when I presented the findings that John Droz, who's a fossil fuel political operative, he was funded to convene a national coordinating council of supposedly local NIMBY groups. You know, the independent groups? Yeah. So they were going to have dummy businesses that were going to buy up billboards to rail against your projects, use counterintelligence by putting people inside your companies and leaking incriminating details. Plot wasn't carried out because they got exposed, but you get the idea. They've been at this for a long time, and it's nothing personal. It's the reaction of an incumbent that is not interested in handing you the keys to market share that you are taking from them. Right? That's what big boy industries do. They do this sort of thing. So a decade later, what we're hearing from people throughout the industry is our reaction, our ability to preempt and respond to these threats has not kept pace with the growth of the threat. And as Matt Wagner of DTE said, he's the incoming chair of the Community Acceptance Committee, the opposition is eating our lunch. So the challenge for developers is, as Will Eberly said to me last night, community acceptance is one of the few places where wind energy costs is going up. And it's going up in a way that could actually kill our industry in terms of the pace it needs to scale. So we need to fix this. And yet we don't have incumbent level budgets. So how do we do that? We look for the obvious stuff that's laying on the ground. Well, guess what? The good news is that our built infrastructure provides some of the best ways to leverage support we need to get new infrastructure built. Built projects can help with new projects. And that's what we polled on. So I know that some companies do community acceptance post-construction really well, and some of them not so much. I'm going to give you a 4-question test to just think on how your companies perform. Once you build, do you communicate with host communities ongoingly? Number 2, do you do it at a sufficient volume and frequency? Number 3, are the ways you're communicating, charitable giving, tours of the wind farm, are they fit together in a deliberate, programmatic way? And 4, does that program have the design to roll benefits up to other ways the company needs to make its case in public? I suspect that for most developers, the answer is no on at least one of those. Okay, so let's take a look at what we found. Our friends of the Conservative Energy Network, C4, Conservatives for a Clean Energy Future, were foresight enough to do this poll, and they were kind enough to let me present the findings mostly. And the poll they've done is very intriguing because one, it goes very deep on one little place. We're going to tell you why we picked the one little place, but goes really deep on one little place. And they use these innovating polling methods that you ought to know about because the way they polled is now accessible from a budget standpoint for all of you. I don't know a polling company, I have no financial interest in getting you to do this, but so we picked this place you've never heard of probably called Huron County, Michigan. So if here's Michigan, it's the tip of the thumb. Why did we pick Huron County? Because it's an interesting bellwether. Big state, bellwether state, sparsely populated, 33,000 people, very red, the highest density of wind turbines in the state of Michigan, with an increasing number of messy fights that have triggered moratoria in a whole bunch of townships within the county. And the wind industry is delivering tax benefits to the county that's making infrastructure improvements. So it's a really interesting bellwether. Now for the poll, we use what's called dynamic online sampling. If I was going to poll by traditional methods, everybody in this convention hall, I'd call all your cell phones and about 10 of you would respond, and then I'd have to figure out how to use demographic data to weight the results I got to try to have it recreate the population I was trying to poll. And that's why you get these terrible gaps between what people poll and what shows up. Dynamic online sampling is very different. No calls, they serve ads to people, and they watch the demographic weighting of who responds so they can make adjustments in the ad service in real time. Half the cost, half the money, better accuracy, allows you to go deep in one little place, right? Developers, many of you need to go in one little place and you need to know what people are thinking. So it's kind of an interesting result. What do we find? Overwhelmingly, Huron County residents, who by the way, they don't like the way the country's going, they don't like the way the state's going, but they love Huron County. 2/3 of them say, you're there at scale. And we asked them, do you want more wind development? Yes or no? And if yes, why? What are the benefits you want to see accrued? And so the number one reason that they wanted more wind development was a thing you are already doing for them. They want tax benefits coming to pay for infrastructure, which kind of surprised us because the industry made, I think, a very smart investment in making family farmers being able to stay on the land their iconic benefit. Good. But that was the second, and jobs was the third. Number one, benefits, which we're already doing. Now, here's the bummer, though. The bummer is that the plurality answer was, we don't want any more. So in this county where they have a lot of development, we don't want any more. In fact, the industry has a negative favorability rating by 5 points. So in the densest developed county in the state of Michigan, they don't want you, they don't want any more. Until, with one question, you give them 3 pieces of infrastructure the industry paid for. A school auditorium, a parking lot, and a learning center. And from that, you get a 14-point swing. Now, if you're not a polling geek or a former political operative, and I was in politics for 25 years, I've read a lot of polling summaries. And I can tell you that if you need to move candidate Mike Casey's numbers up or down, it takes 6, 7, sometimes 10 questions. One question, 14-point swing. Go from 5 in the hole to 9 up. It's a pretty big deal. So what's the conclusion? The conclusion is, at least in this county, a bellwether county, representative of many of the counties that the industry works in, people want you to do for them what you are already doing. And you are unpopular until they're told you're doing what they want you to do. The only conclusion is we're under-communicating this community. We're ghosting them, as it's said in my daughter's circles now. She's 18, so they talk a lot about ghosting. And what we're positing here is that the industry, writ large, not any particular developer, is inadvertently ghosting the community. We build and we go quiet. As a friend of mine in the industry said, we're the one-night stand industry, right? So that's something to think about. Now, I can't sit here and tell you which companies are ghosting to what degree, but I want to present an alternative for you to think about. What if we took 1% of a project's total cost and invested it as an annual investment in not just keeping public support, but growing it through basic things? A dedicated web page, social media that takes the people that work on the project and puts in the centerpiece for their neighbors. We track visitors. We don't just accept the tour. We actually go out and solicit them. And once people come through, we recontact them in like a traditional field organizing program. And then we measure the growth in public support, because we know the polling now is accessible, and use digital ad testing called A/B testing. What if we tracked our public support and then made sure that 2 groups of people knew that our support was strong and growing? The people were going to decide whether the next project gets built, and elected officials at a statewide level who decide our fate on many policy issues. Because then we can tap into that iconic quality, wow, look at that wind farm, right? So there's a different way. The benefits are strong, but let me ask, is anybody here from West Virginia? Okay. So we got 6 months of performance art out of Joe Manchin, right? He had to think about it. Was he going to help clean energy? Was he not? I'm not sure. I'm going to do my own homework. It's cost too much. You never heard him say, yeah, but those gas industry subsidies? We got to cut those. And perhaps that's because if you're a West Virginian, you can get a state-issued license plate showing you're an oil and gas supporter. You can send your graduating high school senior to apply to West Virginia Wesleyan University to get a full ride to become a fracking tech. If you're in Parkersburg, you can go to the Early Oil and Gas Museum. Or once a year, you can attend the Oil and Gas Festival with beauty contests and livestock competitions, etc. Do you think the oil and gas industry made that investment by accident? Do you think that they don't go out of their way to make sure Joe Manchin knows that they are iconic in the eyes of West Virginians? They spend a lot of money doing it. So I understand that we don't have the resources that the incumbent sectors do, but none of us have an excuse for not doing the basic block and tackle. What I'm arguing here for is kind of a formula. Invest a little bit of money in keeping and growing public support. Document the public support is growing and feed that documentation to 2 cohorts, the people who are going to build and the people who represent that area. So you end up having a conversation with so State Senator Smith, did you want to come tour our wind farm since you represent this area? Or you can't make it. Did you know that 2/3 of your constituents really like this thing? Oh, now you want to come. Sure, how's Tuesday? Right, boom. Then State Senator Smith has the picture taken and his feet are duct taped to the floor. He's going to support us. You just work your way up to the governor's mansion. It's a lot messier than what I'm saying, but you get the idea. The dynamics are still what they are. Because I'm going to posit here that if you took a map of the US and you mapped where we are physically present as an industry, build things, buy things, generate power, and kick off tax revenue, and then you mapped where we have enthusiastic championing by statewide elected officials, there would be an intolerable gap in the map. The maps would look vastly different, and no mature industry in this country would put up with it. Not the home builders, not the beer distributors, not the auto dealers. Nobody does. They invest, like the oil and gas industry does, in West Virginia, and they do it all over the place. So there is a way we can get at this challenge, and we can get at this challenge because we are maturing, and it's time for us to take on mature industry practices, perhaps a little ahead of our time. So, summary. Under-engaging in host communities is expensive. I lived through the cylinder crisis in 2009-2010. We were counsel of the Solar Energy Industry Association. It's worth noting there's an FBI raid, 4 different congressional subcommittees, and as someone predicted at the start of it, not a single person spent a minute before a judge because Solyndra went bankrupt with half a billion dollars. The whole thing was a contrivance. But what it did do is it took support for solar energy and renewables at 94% pre-Solyndra among white Republican conservative men, and it dropped it down to 45, cratered it. And it made wind and solar get pulled into the US culture wars, and for a decade we have had a hard time getting bipartisan support, let alone championship for what we need. And we just saw this with the infrastructure bill. We're begging more than we're pounding tables. And this is not the act of a mature industry. So we can't match the incumbents' budgets. We can do the obvious stuff that's lying at our feet. So if your company doesn't do these things, I'm offering this path to think about because with very little investment, we can get a lot of ground covered. Let me stop there. Robin, Tyler, do you want to just add anything before we go to questions?
Is this on? It is. Good. Hi. Robin Pressman with Embold Research. I just want to underscore the point Mike made because it is pretty critical. That 14-point shift we saw represents an education gap, and it represents a real opportunity for companies, nonprofit organizations to go in and do that education and bring that support over. Politicians, elected officials, folks that are going to be approving your projects are going to be turning to see what's going on in the community, and when they can see there are these opportunities for growth, then the rest should follow.
And I want to touch a little bit on Mike's last point that he just made of how do we bridge some of this partisan divide. A lot of people forget John McCain's first ad in the 2008 presidential general election was with a wind farm. Right? This isn't a concept that's been foreign to conservatives. Now, 2008 feels like a lifetime ago, right, when it comes to presidential politics. But at Conservatives for a Clean Energy Future and our sister C3, CEN, we realize that because of where we're at now, it takes a little bit more work, right? We can't just sit in our offices in DC or for CEN at state capitals and change hearts and minds and really take this conversation. And so that's why in 2018, we started our grassroots group, the Land and Liberty Coalition, to really go where utility scale energy or renewable energy projects are being cited, because we realize that we have to engage in these communities, right? We have, as an organization, wanting to see additional clean energy, moving towards a cleaner energy future. We have to really get in, have those authentic conversations, and engage in these communities. And what we see when we do that, and we're seeing the polling really play out here, can be found in Warren County, Indiana, where there was one renewable development going on, negative opinion in the community. But once folks got in there and started having good, educative conversations in that community, what happened was it turned the tide of public opinion in that community. And now, because of that ROI that organizations made into Warren County, it allowed for additional projects to be made going forward. And so we took just a little bit of a seed investment almost, if you look at it, and now the industry's gangbusters there. Mike?
Yeah. So let's take people's questions. Hey, Dean, could you give him a microphone?
I think we're breaking protocol, Mike, but it's okay.
So you talk about an education gap, but there's to do that education requires a format in order to do so. And the format in which we do in rural communities may be substantially different than what we do in urban communities. So aside from perhaps Facebook as the medium of choice, is there any other forms that you find yourself effectively doing that kind of communication?
So you're asking, are there other ways in addition to Facebook that you should be, channels you should be using?
Sure.
Yeah. So it's an interesting stat. I was a little surprised because I've been in the writing we do, we're all about pushing developers to get on Facebook as the new newspaper in the new town square, and largely because there's this phenomenon right now where the local news media has not yet hit the bottom here in America. You've got 1,300 counties, 1,300 communities and 200 counties that are essentially news deserts. They have no working local news media, not crummy local news media, none at all. 1990, the population of the United States was 235 million. I think we're at 331 million right now. There's half the number of people making their living as daily newspaper reporters. Half. So 100 million more people more in the population, half the population that was working in newspapers working now. But when we asked Huron County residents, where do you get your information? I thought we'd have Fox News numbers off the charts. No, it was the two local papers, very thin, barely hanging on. The biggest affiliate out of the Tri-City area, it's Flint, Saginaw Bay City, that throws into Michigan's thumb. And then it was a radio station. Now, I can tell you because we pitch local media all the time, it is a much harder place to get traction. So our conclusion is that local media serves a validating role. Facebook is the place you penetrate and engage because really it's set up not for distribution, it's set up for engagement. I'll give you a couple other things. So one thing we did a look at the major developers' Facebook activities, the grief they were getting on Facebook, and the publicly visible ways they responded. It's 2-3 years old, so I don't know that it holds true now. But what we found is very few companies were using Facebook as the engagement tool. They weren't putting things out and asking for people's opinions, getting to engage, seeing who responded positively and negatively, and then using it as part of an integrated field program. They were essentially hitting the post button on content. And unfortunately, because some of the developers are international in scope, there's a presumption of excessive greenness in red America. So they post a lot of things about climate change and climate disruption and species conservation. Falls totally flat. They don't want to hear it. In fact, it's one of the issues in which we have the biggest partisan gaps on any of the issue sets here in America is global climate disruption. So I think my point here is somewhere between throwing turkeys off the truck and Thanksgiving and having a full-blown program where you're doing all the things we're talking about, there's a resting place where your budgets and your management will allow you to go. And I'm just calling the question without knowing the answer. Are you pushing the company to go far enough in post-construction communication? Because it's where there's capital that's going unleveraged. And when you're budget disparate with the people you're contending with, it's crazy not to use the stuff that's just lying around at your feet, which is what this really is. But it was a good question. Thank you.
Mike, I might also add that in that media question we asked, about a quarter of the respondents to the poll actually identified Facebook as their primary news source. So it does continue to be an opportunity.
Yeah.
I, years ago, used to do political campaigns as well. And one of the first things you would do, and Mike, I know, has done this as well, when you hit the ground, is you line the route between the candidate's office and the campaign headquarters and any other place they regularly go with yard signs so that they're not calling you to complain that they're not seeing their name out there enough. And I've always likened some of the outreach work that we do on digital media to be like virtual yard signs, right? You want to plant them strategically, and you want to plant them in ways that they're building a recognition, that it can accumulate, that it can move up. So if you are thinking about strategically how to engage on social media, it can also help you stretch that a little further.
And back when I did electoral work, I always made sure it was in front of the opponent's house too. But that's a whole other way of playing politics. Sir, to go back to your question and talking about how you message in urban communities versus maybe more rural communities. A little bit about me. I don't know how many people ever read the book Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. It was really popular after the 2016 election. I'm actually from the town right next to Middletown, Ohio. It's where I grew up. I understand rural America. My family, I'm a third generation landowner and come from a farming family in Warren County, Ohio. And the issue set is just different in rural communities, right? And I think the poll found opioids is a really big thing to engage with in local communities. You have to go in and you have to sniffer out which issues are important to rural communities that you work in. People think about, the schools, the roads, right? To go in to ensure that you're engaging with local media where the issues matter most to them. So that would be another word of the wise there.
There you go. Other questions?
We do have a couple questions on the app. So the first one says, can you talk more about best practices and community engagement? What does that look like?
Yes. So if I was going to develop a project in a community I hadn't been in before, I would do at least two things differently than what I see our clients doing, clients past and present. The first is I would map who I'm definitely going to give a check to, and then I would map who I might give a check to. And I'm talking, I bet you if I quizzed all of you and said, what's your supply chain look like? You wouldn't go nearly deep enough in terms of who's a supplier. A supplier can be someone who sells you pizzas or who runs the Motel 6 chain. Because if you properly define who you might give a check to, I'm not encouraging you to go out and say, hey, I'm going to give you a check when you're not really sure you're going to. But if you start with a constituency that's already interested in you coming, then when the argument happens, and it will at the county commission, it's locals debating locals. It's not locals shouting at you. And this is really important. So I think we don't define our constituency beyond the landowner very effectively. The second is I don't see a lot of power mapping. That's what we call it. So if I need 2 votes on a 3-person county commission, I want to get to know these two really well. Who are their social connections? Who is at their wedding? Do they play in a golf? Do they play a golf course? Is it a club? Who is on the board of the club? How do they know them, etc.? This is really important intelligence. So Robin and I were part of a campaign years ago that I assert turned Senator Dean Heller of Nevada, he's now out of office, turn his opinion on clean energy 180. So Heller in 10 and 11 had this quip about clean energy. Well, my energy policy is when I open the refrigerator, I want my beer to be cold, and when I turn on the shower, I want it to be hot, and these renewable guys, they can't get it done. That was his position. But we went on this, I think, very sophisticated effort that Robin ran that took small rural community businesses that were involved in clean economy and featured them in digital content. And the digital content was sent to the social networks of Heller's state director, his 3 top in-state staffers, as well as Heller and his wife. Statute of limitations come off, we talk about it, so look under the hood. This is called relational organizing, and it's an increasingly effective tactic that you can do. So there's relational organizing. So I'd say supply chain definition and utilization. I would make sure I have relational power mapping I can use relational organizing with. And the third is I would use digital in a way that integrates with my in-person. So we were working with an offshore developer, start of the pandemic, and we were going really deep on the 3 town councils that would decide the fate of the project because they were going to have to prove landfall and cables and transmission lines. And we looked at that level, this country club level of detail on the town councils. And the idea was pre-pandemic, when I go to the public library as a representative developer, and I'm talking to a group of 10 people, right? And 3 of them are old and nodding off because they have everything anybody else to do. And one person in the back of the room starts with his or her arms folded. and I'm watching as we're presenting and the arms begin to unfold, if I'm sharp and I'm integrated with my digital efforts, I go talk to him or her after and say, hey, Mr. Smith, I understand. You look like you're a little skeptical at first. What did you think of this? And they've said, well, I want to give you guys a chance. That's really interesting. Could I ask you a question? Would you be willing to say that? Can I do a video of you saying that? Yeah, okay, sure. Get that, boom. That goes on Facebook, and that goes out to the next 30 people I invited who didn't show up. Because they're going to see this person who said, I was a little skeptical, came in, I'm open to it. That's a sort of like retail integration of the digital and the in-person. Both now are necessary post-pandemic.
Mike, sorry, I talk a lot. Mike, I think finding validators in communities is really important, and just as important as we talk about best practices for community engagement, is doing what a lot of us hate to do, and that's celebrate ourselves and talk about ourselves, right? How many times do you see a state representative or a state senator or a county commissioner at the ribbon cutting for your project, right? But are you inviting them to the ribbon cutting for the new road that you put in on your way out of town, or the new wing on the school district? Or in some conservative communities, we actually want to fund the police, not defund the police, when there's an additional officer coming on board. Are you having them there for those ceremonies as well? So continue to win your wins, because that's something you as the developer made possible, and something that is worth celebrating.
I'll go a step further. If you're a developer and you don't track how the revenue you kick off funds infrastructure, you're not like actually keeping that as a tracked, empirically determined benefit stream, you're not equipping the people who helped you 2 years ago claim ongoing credit in the years that follow. Right? And that's relatively easy to do. It's not that expensive. And so it's one of these things, like it's the post-construction engagement that it's hard to say why we can't really do that budget-wise. The other question?
Yes, this one is for Robin. Can you talk more about how your polling works? How is it different from traditional polls?
Sure, thank you. So we were founded on the heels of the 2016 election. Our CEO was one of the original data scientists at PayPal and LinkedIn, and along with everybody else, took a look around and said, something's really broken here. And we've known this. We've known this in traditional polling for years, that our response rates are getting smaller and smaller, that we're having a harder and harder time getting a representative sample. And how traditional polling has been managing this is sometimes adding, paid panels or other methods to recruit people, and then also to weighting the data so that it looks like a representative sample. And by doing that at such a heavy level, it's becoming less and less accurate. So our team created something called dynamic online sampling, which Mike talks a little bit about earlier. And what it does is it serves up ads online, and that's where we recruit our respondents for the polls, rather than phone calls that people aren't answering. And once people connect and take this survey, we're able to assess in real time who's taking the survey and make those adjustments on the front end. So we're making changes to who's taking the survey so that we have a lot less waiting to do on the back end. The net result is, on the heels of the 2020 election, we were looking at the polls posted in 538, the most accurate pollsters in the battleground states. So Change Research is the name of our parent company, started in 2017, and this summer we rolled out In Bold Research, which is our nonpartisan unit. Change does a lot of advocacy work and political work as well, and we had a lot of people saying to us that we wanted to do polling, but we don't want a partisan lens to it. We're doing work already with a lot of governments, media, companies, nonprofit organizations, etc. So that's, in a quick snapshot, the way our methodology works.
I could say one other thing on that. There's, unless you had a reason to pay attention to this, there's polling has been in this valley of death for about 3 or 4 years. The legacy polling doesn't work. What are the received call rates when people are doing legacy polling? What's the current percentage of people who answer the phone?
Oh God, I couldn't even tell you anymore. The story we do tell, though, recently is the guy who was lost in Colorado in the woods, and they sent a rescue team in, and they kept calling him, and he wasn't answering his phone because he thought it was spam. So if you're lost and you're not answering the phone for the rescuers, you're certainly not going to answer the phone for a pollster.
It's somewhere, I think it's like 3 to 5%. So what you're trying to do is do representative sampling off a 5% response rate. Like that's, you gotta be a really good tracker to find that game. That's really hard. And it wasn't that way before. When I started in politics pre-internet, it was, I don't know, it was 25, 30%. People actually want to express their opinions. Now, I don't want to talk to you.
I will also add that our methodology allows really interesting opportunities to dig in deeper. When you're engaging with people on phone polls, you respond differently. When you're looking at something that you're getting on your screen, that you're reading, you can take it, you can think about it, you can put it down if your kid's crying or you gotta, get somebody to bed and come back and do it later. We can look at the timestamps of when people take our surveys, and the number of people who do that when they are not able to sleep at 2 and 3 in the morning are actually somewhat high. And it really allows us the opportunity to meet people where they are and to get a real honest response. People are also less likely to lie. When you're interviewing somebody on a phone, there's pressure, right? You want to say the right thing. There's a social pressure. When you're able to do it online, you can give real, more basic responses to how you're really feeling. And then finally, it allows us a real opportunity to message test using video and visual. It's very easy for us to embed that into our online surveys. And the final piece I'd add is we really, during the past COVID year and a half, have advanced our Zoom focus group technology, and we've been doing a lot of that for message testing. It allows, especially in rural areas, and I can tell you this, having focus groups a ton in my polling years in rural areas, it's hard to get people to come and drive an hour and a half for some M&Ms and a $50 gift card. But if they can do it from home, from Zoom, there's a way that we can really get that representative sample, do some interesting message testing so that when you're going out to these communities, you're going out with the strongest message possible. We all have some assumptions about what we think those messages are, but because we can do this at a much more affordable rate, we can get in pretty quickly and easily and check some of that for you.
Any other questions? Yeah. Can you give her a mic? Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much. I think this is really interesting. I guess my question is, why aren't developers doing this sort of post-construction work? It has to be something besides budget. I mean, going to a city council meeting is essentially free, and going to talk to people, hey, here's a project update. So what have you found as to why people aren't doing this, aside from maybe a budgetary concern?
It's a good question. I think, so I'm going to average what I've observed into kind of a prototype answer, which doesn't really apply to any one company in particular. So we did in 2018 and 19, we did this look I mentioned of who's getting grief on Facebook and who's responding and how they're responding on Facebook. And we got these results, and we went around Wind Power in 2018 and went to a bunch of community engagement heads and say, hey, would you tell us what you think of this, right? Edit this. Did we get something wrong? And we listened to what people said, and we kind of, their collective views formed the executive summary on the response. You can get it on our website. It's not just for NIMBYs is the name of the analysis. And then we interviewed a bunch of people who had privately talked to us. We interviewed them on camera and make them part of the interview series. At the back end of that, I wrote a summary in Recharge, and this is my conclusion. If you look at the field of developers, most developers sprang from the rib of a utility. And only one of them came from an American utility, and all the rest are European utilities. And I suspect that when digital became a thing, somebody in a European capital or European headquarters hired a junior person, hey, take care of the social media stuff. So they did, and they started posting things, and then the cacophony and mess and acrimony on social hit, and somebody went on for 3 or 4 months, and then somebody in the executive team went, oh my God, look, we're just getting killed. This is terrible, stop. So they did a bunch of policies in place that were done for global brand management reasons, but which effectively handcuffed public affairs work here in this country now that we're there. That's my hunch. I have no basis. I can tell you what we observed. I can tell you what I heard. That's a conclusion. Take it for what it's worth. So I think, in essence, I don't know that what we're saying here is a tough sell. I think it's just sometimes stuff's just hiding in plain sight. And I think that's what we got here. Because there's a couple of developers I know that are crushing it. They're doing really good post-construction communication. But there's only 2. Any questions?
Couple more on the app. Tyler, can you tell us more about your work in conservative communities? What are you learning from your interactions, and what works to win support for renewables?
Thanks for the question. I think, the most important thing when you're talking with conservative communities is to give them the God's honest truth, and to admit where the industry is coming. The industry is maturing, right? Be frank when it comes to talking about the economic development that it's going to bring, right? Maybe for the moment, I think this is changing among conservative circles, maybe kind of fade climate change or fade the lower emissions, but talk up things that might not be so intuitive. Heck, right now we're on the verge of war, I hope not, with Russia, and we just did a diplomatic boycott to the Olympics in China later this year. In a poll that we're going to put out tomorrow from CEN, different from this poll. My life is about polls right now. But we're going to see that folks want to hold Russia and China accountable for their emissions. And guess what? You can do that in your conservative community. To go in and to have conversations in churches and at Bob Evans, which is a breakfast chain in the Midwest, for those of you not in the Midwest, to go meet with folks at McDonald's, to have those kinds of conversations, to go to the county fair, to go to the Chamber of Commerce golf outing. Anytime I can get to a golf outing, it's a good day for me. As you go into those communities and just have those very direct conversations with folks, they'll give you the time of day, I promise. And it might take that continued engagement, and really proud of the work that our Land and Liberty Coalition is doing here. But you do start to see that incremental shift over time. And the cool thing about that is, as this conservative clean energy movement is really just at its beginning, right? We've only been around as an organization for 5 years. We're starting to see local champions become state representatives, become state senators. We're starting to see folks we engaged with as lieutenant governor become governor. We're starting to see folks on our leadership councils and folks that have been clean energy champions through our C4 work. We're starting to see them put in their name in the hat for Congress. There's a clean energy champion who has our award up on his U.S. Senate website. So we're starting to see that change. But working in conservative communities in this issue is always very interesting.
The last question I have, can you think of an example when a NIMBY opponent changed their perspective after being engaged?
I can.
Go for it.
I think I have some examples here. One of the really, and I'll be a homer and go for an example from Ohio. When you look at Paulding County, Ohio, which is this really small county, 20,000 people in the entire county in northwest Ohio. So right between Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Detroit, Michigan, sits Paulding County. And back 10 years ago now, they brought in their first renewable energy project. And what we saw was there were certainly folks in favor of it, but also folks in opposition. But as developers remained invested in that community, as they brought the local sheriff out to their show and tell days at their sites, as they literally built a new rotunda for the county courthouse, we started to see projects really change there. And actually, the last time I talked to the community economic or the county economic development director in Paulding County, they're running out of space for clean energy projects, right? They're trying to figure out how can they fit in the next wind farm, the next solar farm. So there are certainly areas where you see when clean energy becomes tangible to folks in rural communities, because for a lot of them it's just something that Democrats talk about, right? Or that folks from the big city talk about. But when it becomes real to them, when their kids are employed by it, when their local business, their small business benefits from it, when they see it on their drive to work and realize that it's not that bad, that it's not that scary, that's when you see folks that are in the opposition. By the way, it's not just NIMBYs. It's not just folks that don't want clean energy in their backyard. There are folks that have legitimate reasons, when it comes to cash rent on their land and things like that. they have legitimate reasons for opposing it, but when you get in there and do that educative work, they find out that that the benefits really outweigh anything that their mind had thought of before.
I'll echo something, but a little bit more abstract, but it's kind of a best practices approach. Like a lot of human institutions or endeavors, if you think about your host community as a 15-70-15 proposition, 15% implacable, hard opposition, not changing them. 15% really into it for you. 7% up for grabs. And so if you've got people who are soft no's, don't do things that make them harder no's. Induce change over time. And I can tell you that one of the things you really don't want to do is say, if this gentleman's a hard no, if he's a soft no, but has got a spoken position on a Facebook comment, it is not in my interest to remind him he had a no position before, because he has to go from a no to a yes. He has to change his mind. He has to do it in the publicness of Facebook. But if I kind of ignore that and keep speaking benefits to him, and the benefits are real, because what I communicate to him is something he cares about, because I've done my research on him. I know he likes to hunt, so I'm talking about wildlife and I'm talking about hunting opportunities around the project. Then I don't have to have him go from a no to a yes. He just has to have amnesia, and that's much easier. Any other questions? We're good?
Mike, we have the polling up online. I apologize that we don't have it on the presentation here. But it's just, if you go to this website right here, www.conservatives4energy.org/research, you can find the polling memo from today, and obviously would love to stay in touch with everybody.
Standing offer, if you work for companies and you got management teams, you're going, I wish that so-and-so, I wish so-and-so on our team was here to hear this. I don't want to, I think I speak for my two friends that will reconstitute this for your executive team. Let us know. I'm happy. It takes, the presentation was 15 minutes and change. Happy to go through it, right? So we're all about evangelizing, using what you got better, and helping you do that. So just let us know. We're happy to put it together for you. Okay? Thanks so much.